They don't have the volume coming from the urban core areas that they need. So the Obama coalition, what would Harris really need? We all know that the Democrats don't have the white working class they had when Obama came up in 2008. And he also had a record minority turnout with a record share of the vote. And where the votes are not coming from is core Charlotte, core Raleigh, and core Atlanta so far. The turnout is not there, and it's not keeping up with the Trump areas of the states. Right now in Florida, first day of in-person early voting, it's an absolute bloodbath. We've got Alachua County, home of the University of Florida, Miami-Dade County are R+ right now on in-person early turnout.
All right, guys, I hope you had a great weekend. Trump was all over Pennsylvania this weekend, working the McDonald's drive-thru at the Steelers game, had a big rally. I'll show you a little clip of that in just a second. I'm telling you, my friends, if you want to know where the election stands, do not miss the show. This is sit down, get yourself a pen or a pencil and a piece of paper, because we are going through the data in a way that no other show will ever go through. My guest today, Seth Keshel, he has broken down the data in every battleground state. And trust me when I say you will learn more in the next 45 minutes than you have all cycle today on the show. Watch the whole thing in its entirety, especially if you really want to know how this thing ends up and you want it to be data driven, not just a bunch of people telling you how they feel and good vibes like the other side tells you. This is the show for you. I'm telling you, if you're a political junkie, if you're following this closely, if you're concerned, do not turn away. This is going to be the best show of the cycle. We've got some great early vote numbers coming out of North Carolina and Georgia. The Democrats are on their heels and they know it. We've got a lot to get to. Before I do that, I want to tell you how I sleep every night, because I get wound up. I get all excited. I want to get ready for the next day, but I've got my Beam Dream powder. Now, this stuff has everything. When you look on the back, man, all of the things that people used to take because, magnesium, melatonin, reishi, all of that, it's in one amazing to drink formula. And I say amazing. This one's the cinnamon cocoa. They've got a brownie. There's some other flavors. Honestly, I would drink it all day long if it didn't put you to sleep, because it does. I take one scoop. I put it in some, a little water, 6-8 ounces, stir it up, put it in the microwave for 30 seconds. And 30 minutes before I go to bed, I have that thing, head hits the pillow. I'm out like a light and I wake up feeling refreshed. I sleep through the night. It's amazing. If you have trouble falling asleep or staying asleep, this is the answer. I take it every night. I miss it once in a while. And I know every time I miss it, I just do. I'm like, okay, didn't take the Beam, but I travel with it. Trust me. Go to shopbeam.com/Spicer. Use code Spicer. You get 40% off. If you are someone has trouble sleeping, this is the all natural, best tasting solution. You will thank me. Trust me on this. All right, guys, real quick, some heads up. National polls moving in Trump's direction. We've got Road to 270 on Wednesday. Amazing update. Trump is in so much better shape than he was last cycle. Here's the thing. They love to focus on national polls, and sometimes they say, Harris is up a point or two. Maybe true, but check it out. In 2016, Hillary was up 47-39, 8 points at this point. And you know where Joe Biden was up? 53-42, 11 points. They don't want to tell you that, do they? The context. That's not all. When you see what's going on trend-wise, voter registration-wise, this episode is going to blow your mind. All right, before we get into the serious stuff, I want to show you just a little clip. The left blew their mind. Speaking of that this weekend, Trump was at McDonald's. Here's a small clip for you.
And I could do this all day. I wouldn't mind this job. I like this job. I think I might come back and do it again.
Thank you.
Look at that.
Mr.
Look at that. How are you?
Thank you, Mr. President.
Nice to see you.
You made it possible for ordinary people like us to meet you.
You're not ordinary.
Thank you so much
You
for
are not
everything you're
ordinary.
doing.
I can see.
We pray for you, and you are the type of person we want to be the president.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
So nice. Thank you very much. Yeah, I took a bullet. That's right.
Thank you, Mr. President.
When you think about it, I guess that's right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Playbook and Politico and NBC News go, he said that Harris didn't work at McDonald's without evidence. Okay, well, where's the evidence that she did work at McDonald's? It's always funny how they go after Trump, but they never actually ask Harris for the receipts, do they? Unbelievable. Well, I'm telling you guys, this is going to be an episode like no one's ever seen before. It is going to blow your mind, state by state, the actual numbers, the registration, the trends, It's all moving in Trump's direction, and we're brought the receipts today. We're going to tell you exactly why. Speaking of receipts, though, the October 15 deadline just came up. Now, for those of you who didn't file your taxes, that was the date of the extension. If you missed April 15th, you could have filed for an extension only till October 15th, though. But if you owe taxes, your taxes are still unfiled, there's some issues that you came up with, you become a target for the IRS. Because if you miss that extension deadline or there's some things that you might have screwed up, you could face wage garnishments, frozen bank accounts, or even property seizures if you haven't taken action yet. But I'm telling you, there's one group that I think you should contact if you get a call, a letter, or a knock at the door from the IRS. They've got all the power. But the folks at Tax Network USA have recovered over $1 billion for their clients. These guys know what they're doing. They've got the experience and the record to be the perfect advocates for you. Do not try to take on the IRS by yourself. It doesn't matter. They want their money. Just trust me. And so the smartest move you can make is go to TN, Tax Network, TNUSA.com/Sean Spicer, full name there, and you will have a free consultation with these folks. But don't try to take on the IRS alone. Visit TNUSA.com/Sean Spicer. All right, guys. This episode right now, I'm bringing in Seth Keshel. If you've never heard of him, he's got a column on Substack called Captain K's Corner. And it is unbelievable. He spends so much time going through every state, checking out their registration and their numbers and where things move and trends. It's like nothing you've ever seen before. You are going to love this conversation. Without further ado, Seth Keshel. Hey, Seth, welcome to the show. Thanks for being with us.
All right, Sean, been looking forward to this for a while. So why don't we get started?
Good.
Obviously, we're 15 days out.
Yeah, let's geek out a little because I was telling the audience, like, I love the fact, I mean, people all the time, look at betting markets, look at this. I've told people, I get that those are all cute, but at the end of the day, data is what matters. And what you do in your Substack and in these analyses is data focused, right? And that's where I think we need to be. I want to just start with some of the states that you've done some analysis in. And obviously the big one off the bat is Arizona, the state that I think President Trump has the greatest likelihood of the 7 battleground states of putting back into his column. Tell me what we should look at in terms of Arizona, because I've got this. I'm going to put this chart up on the screen for the audience to see that you did this forecast model. It's got every county, Apache, Cochise, et cetera, all the way down with what the registration was in 2020 and what it is now. What should we take away from that chart?
Well, Sean, so your audience understands this. We have the media polling, which of course is flawed. And even if pollsters are honest, they're going to have a certain margin of error. But the most predictive analysis that shows the trajectory of an upcoming election is and always has been voter registration by party. 31 states register voters by party. And out of you said 7 battleground states, I throw New Hampshire in for an 8th.
We're going to get to that because I saw what you've been doing on New Hampshire. So I'll get to there. But
right. So some of those register by party and others don't. Arizona, Nevada, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and New Hampshire do register voters by party. So when you pull that Arizona slide up on the 15 counties, you'll notice that all 15 have shifted Republican. So they're either more Republican in its registration or less Democrat. What that means is the momentum. It's measuring the momentum of a party, and it's always geared towards who that party's figurehead is. In the case of the GOP, obviously we're talking about Donald Trump. And in the case of the Democrats for the last 4 years, mostly Joe Biden, but Biden-Harris, as of course she can't distance from him. On that graphic, you'll notice all 15 counties in Arizona have a rightward shift since 2020, including Maricopa County, which is important because Maricopa County is more than 60% of the vote. And when you put it together with...
So in Maricopa, you have that Republicans had a 3.9% advantage in 2020, if I'm reading this right, and now they've got a 6.6. Is that how you should read that?
Yeah, it's actually, as they're finishing up their registration statistics right now, Maricopa County is now R plus 6.9. It's a gap of 176,000 and counting registrations between Democrats and Republicans. So President Trump, when he came on the scenes in 2016, Maricopa County began voting to the left of its Republican voter registration index. That's your flux of the independent voter, especially LDS voters, which President Trump now has a positive approval rating with for the first time in his political life. So if Trump ran the same margin left of registrations this year that he did in 2020, even with all the issues with that election, he would still carry Maricopa County by more than 30,000 votes, according to these statistics. Putting them out for all 15 counties, you're looking at a potential bloodbath, especially if they're not fully capturing a Latino working class coalition shift in favor of President Trump. My registration analysis easily comes out to Trump plus at least 5 points in Arizona, which may be big enough to pull the Senate race too.
Wow. So let me just, I think this is fascinating here. So in Arizona, you think that Trump could win by 5 points there. That's a slam dunk.
Well, that's a conservative estimate just based on the registration trend. In the Democrat,
Okay, but what if, Seth, let me ask you this. I think what I want to understand is, let's say I was a Democrat, but I leave the Democratic Party and become an independent, or vice versa. How does this model take into consideration? It's not that, because obviously people don't have to register by party.
Correct. And that's been the biggest kickback against the type of work that I do, is that just because you're registered as X doesn't mean you have to vote X. And when we get to New Hampshire, you'll see the difference here. But when you stack these results going back all the way into the 90s, as far back as the data can be found, the next election almost always follows in the direction of the voter registration trend. The only times you'll ever see it bucked is if the change is very narrow in an urban area, like this has happened in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania a few times, where the remaining independents, because it's urban, are more left-leaning. But typically this index captures the sentiment of the non-affiliated voter, and therefore that is why the tide is blowing and is rolling in that direction.
So why doesn't a poll pick this up? I mean, I get the unscientific, I get the margin of error, but wouldn't you see a trend more in like a place like Arizona? If you think he could win by 5, shouldn't he maybe be up by 2, 3 in the polls?
And I think that's where his average sits. I think his average in the New York Times is 2. And I've seen some of their recent polls up towards 5 or 6. But one of the bigger issues with the sampling, of course, Harris is now being seen as having benefited from a major response bias when she came on the scenes with very little notice in late July. But in the case of a state like Wisconsin, it's well known that it's hard to reach voters that are out in the hinterlands of Wisconsin, which have trended heavily from being Obama backing counties in 2008, some of them in 2012, to being heavy Trump counties by 50 or more points. And those folks are hard to read. And then when you don't get an accurate read on what their turnout is going to be, you're going to get a lot of variance. And that's why Wisconsin was 6 points off in 2020. So polling, even some of the good pollsters will tell you they think that polling is potentially on the outs. And I would say that given the numbers that I can find that are very predictable, that it would be wiser if you're in Arizona to figure out where Trump is in Pima County in Tucson. And if you get a good read on the Hispanic vote there's a pretty good chance with these more predictable counties that he's going to be accelerating his margins. And I've got a number for Trump near 200,000 votes in victory based on the registration advantages alone.
So I just want to, I mean, if I do this road to 270 every Wednesday, where I go through the 270 states, and I know you've done that as well, but I do it every Wednesday on the show. When I get to doing it this Wednesday, there's no, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I just want to make sure that, like, if I put Arizona solidly in the Trump column as a red state that will deliver its 11 electoral votes for Donald Trump, you would say what?
I would say that you're right that Arizona of the top 8 is maybe the most solid for Trump. I think North Carolina is probably more solid fundamentally than Arizona is. Arizona does have some interesting independent behavior. It's also got a major metro area. Remember, Pima County and Maricopa County make up almost 7 out of 9 votes in the state. So that means that 13 counties are only giving you 2 out of 9 votes, and they can easily be overwhelmed if the margins get out of hand in Phoenix.
But there's no scenario in Arizona where you're like, hey, look, I mean, because I'm looking at every one of these counties that you've done on this spreadsheet. And, again, every one of them moves to the right. There's no scenario where you could say, gosh, if she just runs up the score in X county, this could overwhelm it, right?
Right. So she's going to have to, one of the biggest issues she has is Pima County. Pima County gave Biden a margin over 90,000 votes. And that's Metro Tucson, and it's heavily Hispanic, which personally, outside of the registration trends, I think Trump is going to have a minor Miami move in places like Pima County, where you're going to get a big shift of registered Ds that haven't registered R that are going to back Trump. But even without that, she's due to lose about 18,000 in margin from Biden just based on the changes in registration alone, which is almost double the statewide margin. So she would have to get a Biden margin in Pima County, and she would need to win Maricopa County by as much as Biden had that county certified for him at, which was about 45,000 votes, and then hope for low Trump turnout in the outlying 13 counties just to have a chance to tilt the state. I ran a pessimistic forecast of Arizona, which is separate from my registration model, and it still had Trump by 1.3% based on turnout.
That's what I wanted to hear. That made me feel a lot better. You mentioned North Carolina. Let's move to North Carolina. Tell me what I need to know about North Carolina, because I'll be honest with you, I keep worrying. They had a really good first day of early vote, but the post storm concerns are what get me a little freaked out about how the state might go. Tell me where the state stands and what, if anything, you think we should be worried about when it comes to the impact the storm had.
Well, the first thing you ought to know about North Carolina is that it votes with Florida, and it's voted with Florida since the 1960s. So if Florida's been Republican, North Carolina has been Republican too. That's a good sign because everybody and their mother knows.
And the inverse as well. If Florida voted Democrat, then.
Well, in 2012, Florida backed Obama narrowly, and Mitt Romney won the state. So North Carolina, until recently, has been a state that's voted to the right of Florida. I don't think that will be the case this year. But everyone knows that Florida is going to give Trump a massive margin. And those Sunbelt states are typically moving in the same direction. And with North Carolina, what people would need to know about the voter registration there is it's got a traditional ancestral Democrat registration advantage. And that's been that way since forever. In fact, Florida only recently flipped from a Democrat advantage to a GOP advantage in 2021. So North Carolina.
What you mean by ancestral, though? What does that mean? Well, because my dad voted Democrat?
In the case of the South, you're talking about the old Solid South. The old Solid South came up after the Civil War, where the South continued to vote Democrat until about the 1970s when it began to break apart. Some of the states like North Carolina started poking through in the 50s or 60s to vote for federal Republican candidates, but they still maintained a Democrat edge in state politics, and they still have strength for governor's races, which is why you see the disparity today. But North Carolina has gone from D+9 when Trump won it in 2016 to D+5 when Trump still won it, despite all the mail-in balloting going on. And now it's D+1.5. 96 out of 100 counties in North Carolina have a Republican Party shift present since 2020, including Mecklenburg County, which is home to Charlotte and the metro area.
All right, guys, hate to interrupt this conversation, but I got to tell you about a great guy, my friend Leo Grillo. You've heard me talk about him for months if you are an avid watcher of the show, because Leo had a mission in life. He rescued one dog. He named that dog Delta. And then he thought, hey, I can do more. And he created the world's largest no-kill sanctuary. Didn't say shelter. I said sanctuary. Abused, neglected, malnutritioned dogs, cats, horses, birds, you name it, can go to Delta Rescue and get the care that they need. And Leo has continued to grow Delta Rescue and its mission. If you are a dog lover, an animal lover, a rescuer of pets, you are going to love Delta Rescue. And if you go to deltarescue.org, you can see the work they've done and how it's grown over time. But Leo relies on our contributions, me and you, not the big government, fellow animal lovers. Go to deltarescue.org, think about a contribution. But more importantly, Leo really, really, really wants this to be an enduring mission. Go to deltarescue.org, check out that estate planning kit. You see it up there. Just click on it, download it for me. Just download it and read it. Consider it and pray on it, whether you can make your legacy part of the Delta Rescue legacy to keep it going for generations and decades to come. Thank you for consideration. Now back to the conversation. So what do you think? Should I be concerned about the impact that storm had on Western North Carolina?
I think that due diligence requires you to, understanding that there are 29 counties west of the disaster line. And in those counties, my pessimistic analysis suggests that Trump should pick up about 50 to 70,000 net new margin over them. So that would actually swamp out any new margin gains from Charlotte or Wake County or Mecklenburg or Wake counties the Democrats might make. But from my understanding from locals there are only 4 counties in the West that are really damaged, badly damaged to the point of having to make extra plans to get the vote out. And one of them is Buncombe County. So I think that based on where the turnout's coming from, a lot of those counties are through the roof with turnout. And in Georgia, some of the counties in the East are also through the roof. I believe that motivation is going to get the vote out to where the margins do come through. But
So,
North Carolina,
again, when I look at North Carolina on Wednesday as I do this road to 270, I kept it light red because I was concerned about some of the turnout efforts and the ability, frankly, to turn out, meaning that people still they couldn't get to maybe their voting place if it existed in Western North Carolina. Should I keep it light red or should I go more of a solid red?
I think that it's safe for Trump at least 2 points. The registration trend out analysis looks like 6.3% on my end. I think that you're likely to find a margin between 4 and 7 points in North Carolina.
No way, which would outdo the last two cycles by a significant amount.
Correct. Now, it was 3.7% in 2016. So what you need to understand about the turnout for early voting, it's more Republican in the mail ballot request than it's been ever. And then on day one of in-person early vote last week, 4 years ago, day one in-person early vote was Democrats plus 28% turnout. Day one this time was only Democrat plus 2, and day two was R plus 2.
See, that is huge, right? And this is where the Dems mistake. They think all the mail-in vote is huge. I think our side has done a much better job of getting people to engage, and that statistic bears it out.
They don't have the volume coming from the urban core areas that they need. So the Obama coalition, what would Harris really need? We all know that the Democrats don't have the white working class they had when Obama came up in 2008. And he also had a record minority turnout with a record share of the vote. And where the votes are not coming from is core Charlotte, core Raleigh, and core Atlanta so far. The turnout is not there, and it's not keeping up with the Trump areas of the states.
But it could, right? So we should we be a little cautious of this? Does it just mean that the Dems haven't turned those folks out and they still could?
Well, if we think that they're going to turn into the in-person on election day party, then they could. Right now in Florida, first day of in-person early voting, it's an absolute bloodbath. We've got Alachua County, home of the University of Florida, Miami-Dade County are R plus right now on in-person early turnout.
So in North Carolina, one of the things the Dems will tell you is, post-COVID, a lot of people moved to North Carolina because they wanted to live in a state like that and they wanted to get out of these blue states. Is there any data to suggest that happened, that these people left New York and Illinois or whatever and moved to North Carolina and are now part of a new Democratic coalition?
Yes, there are 4 counties out of 100 in North Carolina that are less Republican or more Democrat than they were in 2020. So in certain areas like Raleigh-Durham, that could be the case. But in most of the rest of the state, especially on the Atlantic coast, heavily Republican counties, and they've been Republican for a long time, it's the opposite. It's the same crew. It's the same crew that's moving down to Florida and turning that from D+1 to R+8 in one cycle.
Yeah, there's a term I heard the other day. I'm sure I can't remember it now. It's called like halfbacks, I think is what they called them. Like there are people who moved down to Florida, maybe thought it was too hot, and then moved to North Carolina or South Carolina or Georgia, meaning they went halfway back to, Minnesota or Wisconsin or whatever. Anyway, I just thought it was an interesting term that I'd never heard. Let me move to the must-win Pennsylvania registration numbers, because 19 electoral votes at stake there. This is the map that really put you on my radar. When I saw your Substack column that you put out that had this first chart on there, I went, wow. And I've played this. If you're a loyal watcher of the show, you've seen Seth's column, this chart from his column up on the thing. Walk me through the big takeaway from this Pennsylvania forecast model that I'm looking up now with 2020 and 2024 registration numbers.
That model continues to get better with time, like a fine wine. In fact, Pennsylvania Secretary of State just released the latest registration data, which I'll update and, of course, get it to you. Last week was the last full week of registration. I believe it ends tonight at midnight, so it's going to get one more update. But the last update, which is not even given to you on that sheet, was the Republicans cut off another 15,000 net registrations from the Democrats. So their lead is under 300,000 for registration, and it's under 3.5%. So
all right, walk me through where it was, though. Let's go 2016, 2020 now.
63 out of 67 counties since 2020 have a Republican Party tailwind. So that means that in the only 4 that are out there, you have Cumberland County, which is a Republican county in the center of the state. It's just one of those Republican demographics that's going a little bit against Trump, but it's almost dead even. It's not much of a shift. And then we have the 3 collar counties of core Philadelphia. I'm talking about Chester, Delaware, and Montgomery. Delaware has a significant shift to the left, about 3 points. The other 2 are very little. In fact, all 3 have a Republican shift for the last 4 weeks. So even the momentum for Trump is captured in all of these counties. So Pennsylvania is a massive Trump type state. It was D plus 10.5 when Trump won it in 2016. It was D plus 7.5 when Trump only lost the state by 80,000 to Scranton Joe, an Irish Catholic from northeastern Pennsylvania. And of course, we have all the 2020 issues that were present. And then in 2024, it's D plus 3.4%. So Trump ran 605,000 votes to the right of their Democrat registration advantage of 686K in the last election. And now it's under 300,000. So if Trump only runs half as far to the right as he did this time, he'll flip Pennsylvania. The numbers for Pennsylvania look like Ohio 2016.
On election night of these counties, and I'm looking down all of them that you've got here on this chart, which 1, 2, or 3 counties do I want to look at to know how we're doing?
Luzerne County used to be the key bellwether of Pennsylvania. From 1936 through 2016, every candidate, regardless of party, that carried Luzerne County carried Pennsylvania's electoral votes. Luzerne has gone full Ohio, and I believe is a solid Republican county at this point. So no longer predictive. But Erie and Northampton counties.
By the way, Luzerne, before we get to Erie, look at this. I'm pulling this up on the chart. 9.1% Democratic registration in 2020. Republican positive registration by 0.7. That's a massive shift.
It's tremendous. And sometimes people say registration is a lagging indicator, but every time you put it on the year-by-year charts, it continues to produce a likely bigger margin. But Luzerne has moved Republican, and I don't think is necessarily predictive anymore. But Erie and Northampton counties are the positions that the left has retreated to suggest that, well, Trump didn't win those in 2020, even though he won them in 2016. Erie and Northampton are substantially more Republican this time around in registration, and my figures suggest he'll carry both of them by at least 5 points. So Republicans aren't carrying Erie and Northampton counties and losing Pennsylvania. In fact, I think Trump's reach this time with the working class may be big enough for him to flip 2 really tough ones, Monroe and Lackawanna counties in northeastern Pennsylvania.
Yeah, but look at that. Monroe was almost 12-point Democratic registration, now just 6.8. What was the other one that you mentioned?
Lackawanna,
which you've got down here as it was plus 20. Holy smokes. Wait, am I reading this right? Because it says Dem plus 26 in 2020, and now is that R plus 18?
It should be D plus 18. But
D plus 18.
That's Scranton, and that's home of Scranton Joe. Trump was within 3 points in 2016. It went back out a little bit to the left in 2020. But if a Republican is pulling Lackawanna County, they're going to make a fight out of Minnesota. That's how deep the working class ties are there.
Wow.
So I think that Trump's got a real chance to carry Lackawanna County, and my figures suggest that Pennsylvania should be with Trump by more than 200,000 votes.
Okay, so if he wins now. Pennsylvania is interesting because in 2020, you remember there was what they call the red mirage. And it was, hey, we're doing well. And then suddenly they shut everyone out that night and counted a bunch of ballots and said Joe wins. What do we have to lead by if we have what's a big enough lead on election night that we can go, thank gosh?
They call that mail ballot differential in Pennsylvania the firewall. And in 2020, the firewall was 1.4 million ballots. Now, it's not very granular. It was Democrat over Republican requests and returns. And Biden's lead was 1.4 million, and his final certified victory was 80,000 ballots. Most people are throwing around a number like 800,000 this year, given the change in voting method for Harris to be up with requests. But I think that all that stuff goes out the window because the GOP has a much narrower gap with mail requests and mail returns than they did in 2020 and a much more Republican electorate in 63 out of 67 counties. I think that for her to be able to be competitive in Pennsylvania, she's going to need to have a firewall higher than 800,000 for sure.
Okay. So on election night, there needs to be an outstanding amount of it, probably 1 million and change, because she needs to get 800,000 of that.
Yeah, Trump was up. Trump had a lead in Pennsylvania over 800,000 votes throughout the counting in 2020. And as you know, they counted votes for days and days.
Yeah.
It's hard to say, but the registration figures, when I multiply them out times the density of registered Republicans and Democrats, suggest that Trump should get about 3.4 or 3.5 million votes in PA. Her figure comes out to 3.1 or 3.2 million on a generous case. And both of these models suggest that we should be able to take them over by 3 or 4 points in Pennsylvania, given that it's not 2020.
So you feel? I mean, look. I said we've gone through Arizona and North Carolina so far. I feel really good. I feel what you're telling me in Pennsylvania, though, gives me enough room for breathing room to feel good about where we should end up on election night and afterwards.
Pennsylvania is like Ohio 2016. And when people fully learn to appreciate these trends, a lot of times they do it looking back. So Missouri was only won by John McCain by 4,000 votes in 2008 against Barack Obama. And now it's not even in the thought of being a competitive state. We're looking at 20 points for Trump this year. So when a state begins to shift like this, you look at Florida, you look at Iowa, you look at Ohio, they're not even competitive states anymore. Pennsylvania has all the makings of that. The only issues with Pennsylvania is they've loosened a lot of their law that makes the state artificially competitive. But I do not think that Josh Shapiro wants Harris to win Pennsylvania or the election. And that's a personal.
Why?
So Josh Shapiro is very ambitious. He's 51.
Because he wants to run.
He's 51 years old, and he didn't get the Democrat VP nomination, where I believe on paper, I'm not sure so much in practice, but on paper, he'd have been the best for the narrative that Harris should be winning Pennsylvania. And right now he doesn't have that, and there's no real narrative that she should win Pennsylvania. So Shapiro, if Harris were to go in and have 8 years as the president or nominee of 2028, that's 8 years in the wilderness for Shapiro. Then you'd probably wind up with an 8-year Republican president at some point. So there's arguably a 16-year period where he'd be out in the wilderness in 67 and past his prime. And I think that both he and Gretchen Whitmer probably would love to come up on the podium in 2027 and say that I'm the only candidate that can win Pennsylvania. I'm the only candidate that can win Michigan. So I think that probably plays into the electoral math too.
No, that's actually, I think you're absolutely right. He wants to be able to say, I could have won Pennsylvania, and therefore you should make me your nominee. And look at how short-sighted you. I think that's absolutely brilliant.
And we nominated somebody from California who's never held a wrench or a hammer or worn a hard hat.
Yep. No. And that list gets, by the way, a lot longer. And who knows? Maybe she didn't even work at McDonald's, like President Trump made that claim. Before I get to New Hampshire, I do want to you've got some data on Nevada that what is the takeaway from Nevada? Because you did this thing where it says crimson and competitive. So crimson, obviously bright red, most of the state that's not either Washoe or Clark County, right?
So when I shade counties, what I do is I evaluate counties by their trend. And the trend is it's like when you get in the ocean and the tide grabs you and it blows you 100 yards down the beach, even though you're standing there. It's very hard to go against these trends. And the crimson counties are the ones that since 2012, really, that Trump took them in 2016 and made them way redder, like most of Pennsylvania, or he flipped them outright. So out of 17 counties, there's 16 counties in Nevada plus Carson City. So 17 county equivalents. 15 of them are Trump trenders by default. Everything except Clark and Washoe counties. Clark is Metro Las Vegas. Washoe is Metro Reno. Those two counties, though, make up 7 out of 8 votes cast in Nevada. So the Republicans blow it out in 15 counties, but that's only an eighth of the vote. So in order to be competitive in Nevada, you have to either win Clark or come very close or win Washoe. And what I've got in Nevada is the Democrats have a registration advantage now that's below 18,000. And Trump in Nevada has run 61,000 to the right of it in 2016 and 54,000 to the right of it in 2020 for an average of 58,000 right of the registrations in Nevada. Right now we're at 18,000. So all the numbers suggest that Trump should flip Nevada by about 40,000 votes or perhaps more if he's really carrying Clark County like Richard Barris thinks he is.
Well, the interesting thing, by the way, just to give people perspective, in 2020, they almost had a 90,000 Democratic registration lead. So that really has shrunk.
So they purged the voter rolls as a result of a lawsuit. And somehow, every time there's a purge of voter rolls, it only harms one party.
God, let me guess. Is it the Democrats, Seth?
It is the Democrats. And it's been the same everywhere that we've found a purge. So Nevada's Democrat voter registration advantage is now inside 1 point. And what these registration numbers, again, don't capture is Trump is very likely in Sunbelt states with large Latino populations to pull George W. numbers or better with Latinos. So if he does go 45, 50% with Latinos, Nevada's not even going to be a competitive state. and you're looking at 5-6 points at that rate. And I believe that that's the case because early in-person voting in Nevada was a Republican bloodbath. And even counting mail ballots, which factor in Clark and Washoe County, the Democrats are barely holding a turnout edge right now in Nevada.
All right. So far, a lot of good news. You want to expand the map from 7 battleground states to 8. By the way, just so we're clear on this, I brought up New Hampshire as a battleground state months ago and was mocked for it. I continue to say that it's on, at least from the public data, it's going to be tough. But I think Kelly Ayotte, the gubernatorial nominee who's to replace Chris Sununu, is running a strong campaign. Tell me what we need to look at in this index forecast model that you've done on New Hampshire and why you think that adds to the 8th battleground state.
As far as strategy goes on New Hampshire, I'm not sure if I was advising President Trump's campaign that I would tell him to go spend a lot of time in New Hampshire. It's not the shortest path to victory, and really it only comes into a victory path on what I call the Hail Mary scenario, and it would pair with Nevada in the event that you needed to replace 10 electoral votes somewhere else. But New Hampshire is, for the first time ever in 2020, it entered a presidential election with a Democrat voter registration advantage of 1.3%. And of course, it was signaling a shift to the left from 2016, where it was down to about 2,500 votes between Clinton and Trump. So Nevada went off 7 points into the left. And now, thanks to another voter roll purge, more than 200,000 voters in a state the size of New Hampshire came off the rolls, and the state has gone from D+1 to R+4.5. Go figure. So the Democrats have lost a lot of their membership thanks to this purge, and in all 10 counties, you have a Republican Party shift. So if Trump is going to be competitive in New Hampshire, he's going to have to flip back Rockingham County in the far southeast of the state and Hillsborough County. We have a lot of issues there. One of the organic problems is Massachusetts migration. So a lot of retirees from Boston area move up into New Hampshire and they bring their Massachusetts voting pattern with them. You have a lot of the Trump white working class dynamic plus the problem with opioids up there. And then you have another strange demographic that's rural white liberals, but the ones that like guns. And they are not big Trump supporters. So where is New Hampshire on the map? It always runs to the left of the voter registration advantage. So the independents lean to the left. But right now, the GOP has an advantage of greater than 40,000 in registrations, which is right inside the tolerance where Trump could potentially flip that state by about 5 or 10,000 votes. And inside the tolerance to where Harris's ceiling is not really more than 10 or 15,000 votes. I told Polymarket that Trump probably has a 1 in 3 chance of pulling New Hampshire, but by the time he got there, he would have already won all 7 of the battlegrounds that we've been discussing today. So I think there's a possibility. I don't know that it's greater than 1 out of 3, but it's certainly not going to be a 7 or 9 point state based on any historical indicators we have.
Okay, so in other words, maybe shade that light blue like that. That's one that Harris sort of has somewhat of a historical advantage right now, but you wouldn't be surprised if it flipped.
Not a lot of votes to go around, so the margins are tight. I would not be surprised if it flipped. I do think that he's more likely to win Virginia and New Mexico than he is New Hampshire.
Oh, that's good news for me.
Yeah, Minnesota's going to be really tough, not because of Tim Walz. Minnesota's got a lot of new laws they put in place with their Democrat trifecta legislature and governor that's going to make that very tough. But I do think Minnesota's going to be a close state. And
you mentioned Virginia. Why?
Virginia's turnout is not where it needs to be for Harris to have margins like Biden put up in 2020.
It was a 10-point win, though.
It was a 10-point win, and then, of course, we had the 2020 rules where it had a lot more mail-in ballots going on. Governor Youngkin has done a lot of good work in the field of election reform. And turnout is really high, just like North Carolina and Georgia, in the Trump strongholds throughout most of the state, and it's not very high in Prince William, Loudoun, and lots of Fairfax County. And even if Virginia is not won by Trump, but shifts within 5 or 6 points, then you're not going to find Harris competitive in Georgia or North Carolina. So watching Virginia on the East Coast on election night is going to be a pretty good tell about the state of the national election scene.
All right, I don't have a lot of time. I got a couple states that I want to ask you about. But before I do that, you mentioned you name-checked Glenn Youngkin. In your opinion, as a guy who looks at this probably more than anyone else that I know, who have been the leaders in election integrity? You mentioned Youngkin. Who else would you put in that category?
Ken Paxton from Texas, the Attorney General, has done a great job, and Governor Abbott, for the most part, has supported his efforts in that. Texas removed more than 1 million registrants over the last 4 years from its voter rolls, which, of course, are dead voters. We don't know the partisan construct of that. Texas doesn't register by party. Dead voters, voters that have moved out of state, voters that are double entried or triple entried elsewhere, voters that are not otherwise eligible to vote. So Ken Paxton in Texas, Ron DeSantis has done a few good things down in Florida for sure. He made ballot harvesting a felony, which is a topic for greater discussion in the future. It's something that, in my opinion, has defaced the intent of elections and voter turnout. Youngkin, of course, with his moves to go to paper ballots and overseeing changes in the voter rolls, those have all been good things. And I'm probably missing a few that deserve some recognition.
Yeah, it's interesting, though, because anyway, I would have thought that it was a bigger list. I'm glad to hear my Governor Youngkin doing a great job. And I would also say that Attorney General Jason Miyares has done a great job as well. But I was hoping it would be a longer list. We mentioned 4 of the 7 battleground states. We talked about New Hampshire. Just talk to me real quick about, I know we've got Georgia, Michigan, and Wisconsin that we didn't mention. Anything that you can glean in any of those 3 states?
100%. So the voter registration trend, we don't have party registration in either of those 3, but I have mirror images of those 3 states and others. Pennsylvania and Michigan are political cousins, and they have been since 1948. Since 1948, Pennsylvania and Michigan have moved right or left together in every single presidential election without fail. They've not moved in opposite directions since 1944. So since 48, Pennsylvania and Michigan, and of course they move with Florida. Florida is definitely going to the right. Pennsylvania and Michigan move with Florida in every election since 1948, except for one of them, and I'll let you guess which one that was. 4 years.
Yeah, 20. Yeah, I was
right.
going to say 2020.
Correct, but Michigan it's a difficult state, and if you've been watching the actions of the Secretary of State there and the stuff that she's been talking about, you'll understand why. But Trump has finished in Michigan. He finished 33,000 votes to the left of Pennsylvania in 2016. Won Michigan by about 10,000 votes.
Right. 10,703.
Correct.
To be precise.
And then in 2020, he was 73,000 left of Pennsylvania's margin. So Michigan has been about 53,000 left of Pennsylvania, where Trump landed in Pennsylvania in the 2 races. And my numbers in Pennsylvania look really good for Trump with a 3-4 or more point win in Pennsylvania, which would absolutely drag Michigan, especially now that one of the key things about Michigan is that we've got minority populations. Richard Barris said that Trump is straight up winning subgroups of non-whites in Michigan. So what that must mean is Arab Americans. He's getting 25-30% of black men and more than 10% of black women in the Rust Belt, which is really big. And Michigan has a bigger population of non-college whites than Pennsylvania does. So Pennsylvania's voter registration numbers suggest a big right push in Michigan. I happen to believe that Michigan is probably the most difficult of the key battleground states outside of New Hampshire because of a lot of the laws in place there.
Wow. I had thought because of Arabs, black men, the auto workers, that would have been, I actually was putting it ahead of Wisconsin.
So here's the big issue with Michigan so in any state, 77% of the population is over the age of 18, 77%. So no more than 77% of the population is old enough to vote. And then when you start reducing that for felons or any other person that might be ineligible to vote, you're going to have a number probably around 70% of the population that may be able to cast a vote. 83.5% of Michigan's population is registered to vote. And that just came public this week. I've been digging that for a while. But they've got a big issue with their voter rolls. And I'll leave that there. But with Wisconsin, the mirror image of Wisconsin is Iowa. They have a lot of overlapping demographics. Of course, they share a land border along the Mississippi River. The eastern part of Iowa trended heavily Republican, which is what flipped that state. And the western part of Wisconsin trended for Trump big time in 2016 and flipped that state. And with Wisconsin, what we see in Iowa is an R+1 state from 2020 that Trump won by 8 points. Iowa is now greater than R+10. We got a more than 9-point shift in Iowa to the Republican right, and all 99 counties are moved to the right in Iowa. And of course, there was a voter roll purge. What do you know? So Wisconsin has sat on average about 140,000 votes to the left of Iowa in Trump's races. Trump appears to be on his way to winning Iowa by around 200,000 votes by my estimate, which should drag Wisconsin. They've never been greater than 9.8% apart since the 50s. So I think if Trump pulls Iowa by 10, 11 points, you're definitely going to have Wisconsin third. So Wisconsin's a natural Republican trend state at this rate, especially since Milwaukee is in decline and the voter roll has shrunk and there's not as many to vote.
Do Georgia for me in 30 seconds or less if you can.
Georgia doesn't register by party. It's a real tough one, but I found Duval County in Florida is a perfect mirror for, and that's Jacksonville. It's a perfect mirror for Georgia. And those two have trended together, shifted together since 2004. Big Bush wins in 2004, tighter for Obama, McCain. Then they went back out to the right for Romney. Trump won them both, but by decreased margins in 2016. They both flipped blue in 2020. And now Duval's on a 4-point Republican registration shift. And now in-person early voting plus mail has Duval Republican plus already on day one of early voting. It looks to me like Duval is mirroring a move to the right in Georgia. And my margin in Georgia came out to Trump plus 5.6%.
All right. Seth, this is amazing. Well, I'd love to get you back when you've got those updated numbers before the election, guys. I mean, this is why I wanted Seth on, guys. So, like, this is stuff that you're not hearing anywhere else. We'll update everything on the road to 270 on Wednesday for that Wednesday show. Tomorrow, we've got a great look at Pennsylvania. We're going to go in depth there as well as get some inside information on the Trump campaign. Thanks for watching and kicking off your week with us. We'll be back tomorrow on the Sean Spicer Show. Make sure you're hitting that notification button, though. You never know when we go live. Have a great night. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.